All right, now that we have done an exercise on the xComponent library, we are going to do a little troubleshooting, and that's what this section and video will go over. What started out as a small and rather boring section actually turned out to be one of my favorites, and I learned quite a bit while making this section. All right, so xComponent structure. Like the post-robot library, xComponent is built using Webpack. So you'll see the Webpack on the Sources tab. So you'll see the source files for xComponent where you can set the breakpoints and stop at any point in there. Then you'll also see the libraries that xComponent depends on. And then you'll also notice that post-robot is a dependency of xComponent. All right, so now we're going to do a little iframe troubleshooting. All right, so Chrome DevTools has some really nice functionality to troubleshoot iframes. So if you take a look at the Sources tab on our xComponent exercise, you're going to see the iframe that the xComponent rendered. So you'll see it among the sources, and it'll have lightbox, container, something, nice long hash value. Then in that will be the xComponent login. And that contains actually all of the source for the iframe that we pulled in. You can see all the JavaScript that specific iframe is pulling in. So it's pulling in Bootstrap, Spin.js, among other things. So now we can even view the HTML that is rendered in our iframe, and we can actually set breakpoints, which is pretty cool. So we can open our login HTML file, which is located in that chain under local. Well, on yours it might say something about c9 users.io, but for mine it is under localhost 8080. And then under xComponent folder, and then we double click on the rlogin. So now when that opens, we can actually set breakpoints there, and we can stop our application in the iframe. So we're going to demonstrate that real quick. If you want, you can pause the video and take a couple minutes to actually set this on your own. All right, otherwise I'm going to go ahead and set the breakpoint. All right, so this is our application for xComponent. I'm just going to refresh it quick. All right, so then on the Sources tab, if I go to Lightbox xComponent, and then Videos, once again, yep, that says C9 users like I thought it would. xComponent and rlogin. All right, so now I can actually set a breakpoint, and I want to do it right here on the Submit button. So when we click our login submit, it's actually going to stop. Awesome. So we just set an on-click event from an iframe. So it's from a rendered on a different source. So that's pretty cool. So now that we are paused in the iframe, our console on the console tab is actually in the iframe scope, so we can execute functions on the window.xprops. So let's go ahead and execute these functions in the Chrome console. We're going to execute user.logout, user.login, and give it a new email address. Then we're going to execute window.xprops on login with the user variable. So take a moment, pause this video, and execute those functions and see what happens. All right, if you haven't already paused the video, you should do it now because I'm going to show you how to do this. So let me go back to our training app. All right, so here we are. I'm going to go to the console tab. I'm going to clear the console so I can see what we're doing. and then we said user.logout. And we want to say user.login. New email address. And then we want to execute window. Alright, so this is actually going to execute our onLogin function in the child, so in the iframe, which will then message back to the parent, user. Boom, and it returns a promise. Alright. Alright, so now we're going to resume the application, and you should see a login alert. Click the alert only once, and now you should see that the user is logged in as sure@awesome.com. So if you click the OK again, that will actually change to whatever you initially submitted the form with. So basically, we just paused our application and manually executed the functionality to log out and then log in a user. So we will go do that quick. Okay, so I'm going to continue. We'll see one alert. Boom, now we have sure@awesome.com. So now our real functionality that we actually wanted to do before we interrupted it is now running. So we get another alert, and that changes to log in with the test@awesome.com. All right, so some more things we could do with troubleshooting iframes. Now that we know that we can execute these functions on the iframe scope when we're in the iframe scope, but it's kind of cumbersome to go and set a breakpoint to get to the iframe scope. Luckily, Chrome DevTools makes this easier. So if we go on to the console tab and we look for the top drop down in the top left corner of the screen, if you switch to the xComponent, your console will now be in the iframe scope. So you'll see this is what it looks like, and when you click the top, it has a drop down of all the other iframes that are on the page. So if there are a ton of iframes, there could be a ton of these. So take a moment, pause the video, and switch yourself over to the scope of the iframe. All right, so you should now have this switched to the xComponent. So now we're going to make sure that we are logged out. So if you're logged in, click the logout button. So we should see the iframe in our application. So we're then going to switch to the iframe in the console, and we're going to execute user.login suite@awesome.com. And then we are going to execute window.xprops.getUser and see what happens. So take a moment, pause the video, and execute that in your console to see what happens. If you haven't paused the video, please do it now, because I'm about to go over the answer here. So we're going to switch back over to our exercise, and I'm going to make sure that I have the freshest one. We're going to make sure that we're logged out. All right, so now it said I want to switch to the xComponent, which I am assuming it's going to be this guy. Then I'm going to execute user.login. Sure@awesome.com. Okay, and then I'm going to execute window.xprops on login and send it to user. And we get the congrats on the login, and click OK, and Boom. User is now logged in. All right, so we just changed the iframe scope and logged in our user and then forced our child component, our iframe, to call actually we did the onLogin function, which then messaged that back to the parent, and then the parent thought it was a login, so it went ahead and set the user and displayed its information. So now we see the suite@awesome.com user logged into our application. And just for reference, an even easier way to get to the iframe scope is just to right-click the iframe and inspect it. So if I was on our application, log out here, you'll notice I'm on the top currently. If I just go to inspect, you see when I get in the actual iframe itself that it switches to whatever component or iframe that I'm in. So that's probably the quickest and easiest way to get to the iframe scope. And then you don't have to choose from a list. You kind of know that you got the right one. So xComponent logging. So now let's open up Chrome DevTools and go to the Console tab. And let's take a look at the logging. So some of the logging should look familiar since it's post-robot. Logs generated directly out of xComponent library. We'll start with xc and underscore. xComponent logs don't have as much useful information as the post-robot logs, but you are able to see when the functionality is actually executing. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at the logs on our application here. I'm going to go to the Console tab. All right, we're just going to go through these kind of one by one here. All right, so we see xComponent login component construct parent. So this is when our parent is actually being constructed. So this next one is the render lightbox. So the lightbox render has been called. This is actually when the xComponent.create has been called. So then the render lightbox has been called. So now xComponent is opening the lightbox, resizing since we made our own dimensions. Then it's loading the URL that we gave it, so the rlogin.html. So you'll see we are listening, and then you'll see this little portion here where we have xComponent logging component init child. Well, actually, we'll see first the construct child. So this is when the actual child's constructed. We are constructing the iframe. Now the child is initializing, and this is, remember when I said the xComponent, when the child loads it, it uses post-robot to send an init message. So you'll see here, xComponent send to parent the init message. So that's basically xComponent saying, hey, I'm sending the parent my init. And so this is kind of cool. Now we see post-robot actually send the init message from the iframe. So the iframe is our child. And here's our page that's sending. And we can see that it's a send and it's a request. And here's the name of the post-robot message, which is xComponent_init. And we can see that that's just the domain that we have. So this is initialization. So anything inside of this is just going to be what xComponent needs to initialize itself. So if you look at the data, it's not going to mean much to us, but you'll see there's a close and an update props. So then we see the full page, which is our parent. Our login.html just received the request xComponent init. And it should have received the same thing that was sent, which it did. So here's where the cool part starts. If our next post-robot log here is from the parent, and the parent is sending a response to the init message back to the iframe. And what's it sending? Well, it's sending the props that we defined in the xComponent definition file. So if we look at props here, we can see there's also a context for lightbox, but the props is the most important part. We'll see email, right? Because that's what we're calling in our render lightbox call. We're sending that array of properties over, or object of properties. So you see email, you'll see we have our getUser function, which is a post-robot method. You'll see that we have our onLogin, which is another post-robot method. And then these are, some default events that are on xComponent by default. So on close, on display, on error, on enter. On login was ours, and on timeout is default. So that's super cool. We can see just by looking in the logs the data properties that the child or the parent is sending back to the lightbox. All right, and then we see, I believe that was this one. Yeah, no. So we sent the response back. All right, so then we'll see xc login component call prop get user, because this is where our login.html is calling that get user function. So this log here is actually from the iframe, and it's receiving the response of xComponent. So this is basically responding a confirmation that it received this callback. Awesome. So that is how we can read through the xComponent and post-robot logs to see how xComponent kind of operates, how post-robot operates, and then how it all kind of fits together. And the last thing that we want to do is just to show you that if we click the X button up here, what this actually does is it calls this.close on the parent component. So you'll see that logged, login component close, so that was called. And then there is a final log for xComponent login destroy. So the close function actually calls destroy, which actually destroys the iframe. At that point, the iframe doesn't exist on our page anymore. So it's important to note that once we call close, there's no communication. We kill the iframe, so there's no more communication that can be happening across domain. So if I actually try and click my logout button now, I'm going to get an error because there is no iframe to be communicating with. So I click logout, and it's trying to message back to the iframe, but the target window is closed. All right, we already did we found the get user call, and we clicked the X, and we saw what was logged. So xComponent's close function permanently closes the component. We just saw that, and it's a final state. So once it's closed, the logout button will no longer work. So if you saved anything that you're trying to execute functions back with, they're going to fail. You'd receive that error saying target window closed. So it's important to know that the close function is the final state of an xComponent. All right. So xComponent and in context. So many of you have probably seen post-robot and xComponent logging in the JavaScript console when trying to debug in context version 3 or checkout.js version 4. So our in context or checkout.js product went through the exact same revisions that we did of our login exercise. So the early versions of InContext used native post message, which we did in our very first section. Then late in the GA release, we added the post robot library when we added the iframe functionality. The lightbox. So that was added, I believe, in November 2015. I'm not 100% sure. But it was right when we added the lightbox functionality. And then V4, Checkout.js V4 is completely developed with xComponent. Now you probably know why we started at post message and kind of worked our way all the way up through xComponent, because in order to troubleshoot things like Checkout.js, it's extremely valuable to know, how it's built and how it operates so that we can effectively troubleshoot it, which we will do in the next sections. So that is it for the xComponent. Now we are moving into Checkout.js.